Hello, everyone, and welcome back for our next session in the agenda today. Really excited to introduce to you Brian Norton, who's the COO of My Ether Wallet. If you've ever owned Ethereum, you've probably engaged with this product in some capacity. And Brian's going to be sharing an insight into what it means to escape the Bitcoin narrative and appeal to the left. But I won't plagiarize his content any further. I'm going to pass the reins straight over to you, Brian. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. A little about me. My name is Brian Norton. I'm CEO of My Ether Wallet. For those who may not know, My Ether Wallet was the first Ethereum wallet interface alive on the Ethereum blockchain. We're about 3 weeks older than Ethereum mainnet itself. We specialize in making user-friendly products for people to interact with Ethereum, including wallet interfaces on the web, on mobile, the browser we have a browser extension, and we also have an open source blockchain explorer. So we've been really focused on making Ethereum in particular, and now as we've moved into this multi-chain world, crypto in general, accessible and comprehensible to the average user, which is sort of tangentially related to what the topic of this talk is. What I'll be discussing today is how we as a community try to escape the Bitcoin narrative and start making appeals to people on the left of center on the political spectrum. And I'll dig in a little bit more on what I mean by the Bitcoin narrative in a second. But I want to first just do a little disclaimer up top about what this talk isn't. This is not going to be an endorsement of any particular ideology. I would consider, full disclosure, I consider myself left of center, but I'm not trying to convince you that you need to be, only that we as a community and we as an ecosystem need to start creating narratives that appeal to that side of the political spectrum. It's not a commendation of your political ideology unless you subscribe to an evil one. It's not an endorsement of any particular projects. None of the projects that I name drop here are affiliated with My Ether Wallet, besides, My Ether Wallet itself. So with that, let's get into it. This breakdown kind of comes from CoinDesk last year. They did a survey of what are the main political narratives that are present in contemporary crypto. And I'll draw your attention to the center column. Most of these political ideologies fall on the right side of the spectrum. You can look over at the far right. We're not going to discuss those other than to say that those ideologies, I don't believe, represent what this ecosystem is all about. However, we don't do ourselves any favors by pretending like those elements haven't come into play, and particularly early on, when the main narrative was simply censorship resistance, limited to censorship resistance and pseudo-anonymity. But generally speaking, most of what we see at least in popular narratives, is crypto appealing to these people down in the middle, particularly libertarians. It's considered obviously a value transfer out without intermediaries and not governed by a centralized governmental authority. Obviously appeals to the libertarian narrative. But there's also, of course, but we've also seen that it also appeals to people who are market fundamentalists, market radicals, fiscal conservatives who just want to avoid government scrutiny over their assets and feel like government should stay out of people's financial lives. And then people who kind of straddle this line, anti-authoritarians, imperialists, who sort of oppose statist authority, some on the left, some on the right, but generally speaking, kind of a mix of those two. And then, of course, alpha bros, crypto bros, not really in it for any sort of political framework, just here for those gains. And then, so really on the left, all you see is, progressives, people who are liberal, don't necessarily see crypto as being something that is political, but generally, but are not contradictory to social progressivism. But you don't see much in terms of socialists, environmental radicals, nothing along those lines. And so, so I'll just open this up. This is a graph. This is a Venn diagram from Quartz in 2018. Now, for context, in 2018, there was still very little going on of note in the crypto ecosystem. We're just after the ICO boom. Lots of new projects launched and crowdfunding. The number had gone way up during that period of time when it was starting to decline. And this was, according to a Quartz poll, the breakdown between people who were in crypto and libertarians. And it was, like crypto bros were libertarians and libertarians were crypto bros. And as far as anybody was concerned, crypto bros were really all that crypto was. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because from what I can see, what I've seen in popular media narratives is this hasn't changed that much in terms of in the imagination of people outside of crypto. Libertarians and the crypto ecosystem is still largely considered the same. And that's the Bitcoin narrative. Bitcoin was the first narrative. Those who supported Bitcoin early on shaped the dialogue of how media approached crypto very early on, and that narrative has persisted and has even been reinforced over the last few years. And we're at a point right now where it has become very, very difficult to shape that. And it comes across and so when you see these criticisms coming from the left, they fall into like a couple of different camps, mostly tied to Bitcoin. And of course, we're all probably familiar with this, the environmental narrative. Now, the environmental narrative really emerged over the last year and a half, 2 years, and really took off at the end of this last year and at the beginning of this year. I have tweets up here from 2 high-profile senators here in the U.S. Railing against crypto's energy use and the wasteful environmental impact of proof of work. Now, of course, these came out in July of 2022. This is pre-merge. This is pre the largest smart contract platform in the world moving from proof of work to proof of stake and decreasing its emissions by basically 99.9%. so that to a certain extent, outside of Bitcoin, a good portion of this environmental narrative has been addressed in the code, in how that blockchains run themselves. But as you can see at the bottom of my slide, this was published by The Ecologist just today. Actually, I threw this in today. Crypto is killing the planet. That was the name of the article, and it if you read the article, it conflates crypto with Bitcoin. It discusses crypto's negative environmental impact on the planet, while never addressing that the merge has happened, never addressing this reduction in emissions and energy usage on Ethereum. It only discusses proof of work as it applies to Bitcoin and conflates that with crypto as a whole, which is obviously problematic for the rest of the ecosystem. The other criticism that you often see coming from the left is the financialization of everything, and I'm sure you've heard this this term before. It's a narrative that actually has nothing to do with crypto. It really started to emerge in the 80s during the periods when the Reagan administration was here. We had the Reagan administration here in the U.S., and we had Thatcherism and the privatization of public works happening in the UK. And what a lot of people, particularly on the left, were predicting was this move to privatization would force people to financialize every aspect of life. And we've seen that come to fruition over the course of the last 2 decades, with the rise of social media and the rise of Google and the passive collection of data and the productizing of users on major internet platforms where people have been financialized. Part of one of the narratives of crypto that has kind of emerged early on was this idea of taking back data, taking back online identity. If it's valuable to a corporation, it should be valuable to you, and that should be something that the individual should be able to monetize. That is something that has kind of been criticized and skewed a little bit in mainstream left narratives as this idea that crypto naturally leads to this financialization of everything. That the idea that we have to monetize all of these things, we saw that in last year there was experiments in tokenizing your time, where you could sell or exchange tokens for time of your day. We saw this again in the NFT craze, where the idea of all content being verified on a distributed ledger was therefore necessary, and that was going to be the next wave of content. And soon, everything was going to be an NFT, and we're all going to be tokenizing our time. This narrative isn't entirely uncompelling, because a lot of experiments have been done with that, and so that dovetails into the other major criticism that we see coming from left of center media narratives, is this sort of failure of market solutions. And this comes from a general skepticism towards market-based solution to address societal issues. So you'll see most of these are headlines just scattered from throughout this year. You know, crypto crash. Bitcoin's libertarian dream is open. Crypto is crashing. It deserves to. There's sort of the Schadenfreude there that that crypto, because because it is associated with market-based solutions, market-based fundamentalism, when it fails, when that volatility becomes too great and people start losing money, it becomes a confirmation of a particular worldview. It also oddly plays into criticisms about when the economy overheats. I draw your attention. I was amused by this a little bit. A hedge fund manager actually pointed to crypto as one of the top 11 causes of inflation. And he pointed out this statistic that last year, starter homes, about 11.6% of people buying starter homes for the first time did so, were able to afford the down payment due to selling cryptocurrencies that had appreciated. So congratulations. We effectively overheated the economy. And so this this idea that not only are we does this criticism come in of people are losing money because crypto is a scam or crypto is a Ponzi, but then there's the flip side is, oh, people are making too much money, and it's hurting the rest of us. And so on both sides, wealth loss and wealth building are both equally kind of criticized in this skepticism that that we have over market-based solutions. And so why have these narratives been so effective? Well, I think that the first thing is that it speaks to a genuine value set rather than to fears. For example, if you take the environmental narrative, leftists aren't, or people on the left, liberals, people on the left are not scared that the environment is being damaged by late stage capitalism. They know that to be true. And they believe that it needs to be stopped. So it's actually not playing on a fear because nobody actually fears that crypto by itself is going to destroy the planet. The rainforests were in danger far long before we started burning oil so that we could mint mid-million-dollar apes and sell them. So that's not actually the fear. It is simply a contributing factor that violates a particular value set that is strongly held. The other thing is the elimination of one doesn't negate any of the others. So if you believe strongly that that capitalism, as it currently stands, is destroying the quality of life, eliminating the middle class, you're not going to be, and that crypto is part and parcel to that. You're not going to be assuaged because somebody tells you, oh, but Ethereum dropped its emissions by 99.9%, because environmentally friendly overheated capitalism, to somebody who is skeptical of such, is not any better. There's no amount of energy emissions that are acceptable for continuing contributing to that environment. And so, and the other thing is that they all have the benefit of at least being partly true. The Bitcoin does run on proof of work. There's no getting around of that. There's no roadmap for that ending. It is still the largest cryptocurrency, and it's still the most visible cryptocurrency in the space. And so, as long as that exists, the environmental narrative will continue to be true. As long as we continue to doing these experiments with the tokenization of real world assets or the tokenization of our time, those criticisms of the financialization of all things are going to continue to be true. And if we continue to exclusively focus on creating different styles of privately held value, we're still going to be vulnerable to criticisms of hypercapitalism. And to a certain extent, these will always be true. All of these things will always be true because we're a big tent ecosystem. We thrive on being permissionless, and therefore anybody can build on these platforms and anybody can do these tokenized experiments. So those elements will always exist, and they probably should exist so they can compete with other types of narratives and continue to create innovation in space. The biggest thing that has though, that I see as contributing to the effectiveness of this narrative is there's really been no substantial counter narrative created to address these concerns. And I don't mean contradict these concerns, but to address them, to communicate what types of social coordination possibilities are available in blockchain. What kinds of DAO structures there are available? What social goods funding looks like in the blockchain space? What experiments are being done there? And this can be attributed to a kind of dearth of effective communicators working in Web3. Not to do a shameless plug, but my Ether Wallet's head of marketing, Vince Major, recently did a talk at DevCon about the need for soft skillers to come into the space. And by soft skillers, we mean effective communicators, people who think creatively, non-technically, but can take complex ideas and make them digestible to the general public, because we have to accept the fact that we are still in a place in Web3 where we're creating technology, more so than products. And as we start to productize, effective communication is going to be key in leveraging the community and social benefits of blockchain technology, and not just the Bitcoin number go up, hodl and sell narrative. And then finally, another reason that these narratives have continued to be sticky, even as movements have been made in the space to address them, is because now there is incentive to continue them. So I don't know if anybody got to see James Beck's from Consensus's talk at DevCon this year, but he did point out this emerging cohort of sort of professional crypto skeptics, and he named people from the Financial Times, Jemima Kelly, Jacob Silverman from the New Republic, and even Ben McKenzie, whom I did not realize was doing this. Ben McKenzie is an actor you might know from the OC, and he played Commissioner Gordon on Gotham. Big crypto skeptic, and he's written a number of pieces for Slate and other publications. I wanted to draw your attention to this one. This one here from Patrick McGinty in Jacobin. This is from this week. Ostensibly, the article is called "There is no leftist case for crypto," and ostensibly, this is a review, a book review for Vitalik's new book, Proof of Stake. But rather than it being an in-depth book review, it really does more than to reinforce a pre-existing narrative that there is that the crypto and blockchain and Web3 has nothing to offer people on the left of center, that there are no political frameworks for this that address progressive and leftist concerns, and you can see from the opening sentence, most of us sense cryptocurrency is a scam. This sets the tone for the rest of the article. It assumes that collectively, the left assumes that crypto is a scam. So it takes it as a foregone conclusion that anybody coming from a left of center perspective has already adopted all of the narratives that I've kind of just discussed, and it is up to the Vitalik and the rest of us to prove it to them that it's not that's not the case. I won't. Spoiler alert: he says that Vitalik, and by extension us, have failed to do so. To a certain extent, that's correct. It is on us to create those narratives that will address these leftist cases, but it also doesn't change the fact that, as far as this writer is concerned, he's shooting fish in a barrel. He is singing to the choir. He's preaching to the choir, and he has nothing to prove. He has nothing to prove to them. I also thought it was interesting that in his description, he notes that he is at work at a novel about cryptocurrency as a follow-up to his novel about the driverless car sector. So he specializes in works of fiction about technologies that have bad press. And so there is this incentive here to continue this narrative and reinforce this narrative because it has been so heavily established. So what can we do? First, we have to admit that we have a problem. We have our technology is not going to sell itself. It's not going to explain itself. That is on us, and that means admitting that, acknowledging the legitimate criticisms that we have received and our own failure to address them. Another thing is to actively research what is happening in the space, what experiments are currently going on in the space that can address these narratives. So that includes public goods funding, Gitcoin being the biggest example, but Retro PGF on optimism, they've been running for about a year. They've recently released a report on potential iterations they can do to address conflict of interest in public goods funding. Coordination and organization, particularly around DAO structures. Those applications can be made for all sorts of organizations, including nonprofits, labor organizing, and then of course UBI. And one example of that is Proof of Humanity. So taking note and actively researching these sorts of initiatives can really give ourselves educate our own communities about what kind of narratives are emerging that we can then communicate and amplify. And we could only do this by making sure that we're bringing soft skillers into the space, that we're not alienating those leftist voices, those left of center voices, I should say, from coming into the space and continuing these sorts of projects. So we run into sort of a catch-22. If we allow the Bitcoin narrative to continue to proliferate, we will only keep people who might be sympathetic to Web3's aims from coming into the space. And so we will keep those left of center voices out, and they will then these initiatives will become harder and harder and harder to amplify. And so I think that that is primarily, those are the primary tools that we can kind of leverage at this moment to counter these narratives. And thank you very much.
Hello, Brian. How you doing? Great presentation.
I'm well. How are you?
Good. Yeah, I love that. I think it was a great insight into kind of the political underpinning of all of this. It's actually, it's a complex beast when you look at it, right? It's how do we drive? I mean, it feeds into that fundamental question of how do we drive this mass adoption of these technologies as well, because it's the biggest challenge. There's a bit of an echo chamber still existing around these technologies, and we need to, brands are obviously exploring research and development into the space and trying to acknowledge these technologies. But when we have a lexicon in the public media that's kind of promotes it all as, world burning, it's difficult to see the next steps in that future. So, I mean, what are your, particularly with this particular meetup, this event, focusing on the future for commercial adoption of these technologies and fashion and the metaverse adoption, and with underpinned by the blockchain, of course. Like, how do we shift the conversation and make sure that we're building products that meet the mass expectations, or meet the reservations of the masses, as are quite popularly publicized. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a very so it's a tall order. So one of the things that we see in, one of the popular narratives that's kind of moving in commercial, and we've talked about it. There was the last panel was about fashion in the metaverse, and you're kind of taking something that is already a little bit exclusive. Appeals to a certain demographic of the population, and then you're applying a technology to it that has been accused of being over financialized, and even though it's still to a large extent not true anymore, damaging to the environment. And let's take that and apply it on top of it. So on two fronts, you're gonna run into a lot of friction with certain people of certain ideologies. And so pushing hard, I think it's very important to push hard and on the narrative that, for example, luxury, if we're taking the example of luxury goods, that this is environmentally sustainable, that there is some sort of environmental incentive to do these things. So distribution of this will contribute to the purchase of carbon credits, something like something of those lines. That's just one example off the top of my head. But creating those sorts of environmental incentives for people so that they can latch onto the narrative that, like, not only is this exclusive, not only is this not only is this rare, not only is this valuable, but it's also beneficial. Mm-hmm. That there is some reason other than wealth and status for this technology, for these kinds of products, and that's going to be very important for everybody, all of us going forward.
100%, yeah. What about when we're looking at this technology not as a collectible worth a certain amount, and it's in that kind of more exclusive category where, sure, there's less of them, so there's less, emissions required. Mm-hmm. But when we're looking at utilizing this as a technology that can underpin traditional business supply chain or processes, and now we've got a kind of, and it could have a huge value in industry, right? But there's going to be a lot of, say, ledgers of NFT ledgers, to say that even one product gets from A to B, but these companies are producing millions of, say, it's fast moving consumer goods, for example. What about in that environment where we're trying to bring the technology down to, something not exclusive?
So yeah, when we talk about like traditional business applications, I think that this is going to be one of those things, like just like I think what you're asking is like how do we make it clear the way so that this technology becomes the way of doing business. And I think that we do. I think largely that will come from creating these narratives up top, and like the more exclusive side that like address these sort of narratives that I've talked about, so that on the base layer we're free, like we're like that. Those kinds of solutions meet less resistance. It reminds it's and there's going to be growing pains. I mean, there was the move from in the 90s, the late 90s and early 2000s, to digital offices and offices that utilize the internet. I mean, we're talking about like just over 2 decades ago, and that was painful for some people who had been in business for 30 years. Are all of a sudden having to dramatically and radically rethink the way they interact with not only businesses, but with government, how they pay their taxes. And they had to do this all in a relatively short period of time when you think about it. And we're going to feel that again. That's going to happen. That's going to start to happen again. And so if you remove the sort of the sort of like political and ethical blocks in the way, in the more visible realm of this technology, the invisible, like the sort of base layer, will be allowed to proliferate. That's what I think.
Amazing. And just one last question then. I mean, just coming back to this kind of almost politicized conversation around the future of this space, and just to understand, like, your perspective, is this a generational thing that it's going to become, like Gen Z are both more climate conscious than ever before, but also much more immersed into the digital landscape and want to have a digital profile and own assets, and are more likely to go into the metaverse. So like how do we tackle kind of these two things? Obviously we're going to be hopefully removing some of the kind of the environmental impacts of these technologies as it gets better, but there will still be computing power required, and the metaverse is a whole different beast when it comes to all of this. But is it a generational thing? Would you say like that we will see a larger adoption and and opinion change when it comes to looking at these technologies with new generations, particularly Gen Z and beyond?
I think that if we're successful in sort of addressing, like staking our claim over these narratives now, they'll start to die. Like these old criticisms will start to die away. New ones will emerge.
Sure.
New ones will absolutely emerge, and Gen Z will adopt those. But it won't be of a case. It won't be a question of how do we stop this thing? Why is this thing bad? But how do we make this thing better? How do we make this thing work for us? I have an artist friend who got a good deal of backlash for moving into the NFT space. And what he said was, he's like, I don't really worry about it, because what's happening now won't continue happening. And soon this technology is just going to be the way you get the thing you want. And it's going to become enmeshed in the fabric of our lives. And the gripes that we have about it are not about like abolishing it. It's about like, okay, well, how do I make this easier? How do I make this more beneficial to me? How do I make this more profitable to me? How do I make this more comfortable? And how do I make this more fun? Those become the questions.
Yeah.
Not is this going to make, is this Bored Ape going to make the planet unsustainable for future generations?
Yeah. No, amazing. And Brian, I really appreciate your insights. I'm looking forward to seeing where the future takes us and how we can make sure we're bringing everyone along on the ride. It's really, really great content. So if anyone wants to catch that after the event, I'll share it with Brian first, of course, but we'll be able to kind of put that out there maybe on YouTube or something, so you can go and check out the talk and digest those learnings in your own time. But Brian, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today. Really appreciate your contribution, and look forward to seeing what comes next, right? see you in the metaverse. Thanks so much for your time.